on today's episode, I'm joined by Stephanie Sousa, who recently joined a new stealth mode life sciences company as senior vice president of operations, I believe, or at least the
Correct.
previous. There we go. Stephanie's worked in life sciences her whole career for various well-known firms in Greater Boston, to name a few: Novartis, Agios, and now the Stealth Mode company. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's great to be here.
We appreciate it. I thought for today's conversation, given your experience in operations for various firms, it'd be just a great opportunity to hear your path, what led you to where you are, and just sharing some of your experiences along the way, working for a company like Novartis and then transitioning to a smaller but not small firm, and now an even smaller firm. I imagine there are tons of different roles and responsibilities that come with it, and wearing different hats. So I figured we'd just kick things off and start from the very beginning basics on how you got into life sciences and if you always knew you wanted to work in this industry.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think the how I ended up in life sciences was a bit serendipitous. I always had a passion for science and math as a young girl. Um, And I had a father who really encouraged me to pursue that. At one point, I said, I think I want to go into business. And he was like, absolutely not. You follow that passion for science and math. So I contribute that kind of encouragement at a young age of being inquisitive. I was really involved with nature, loved being outdoors, and loved just learning and asking questions. And so I received my undergrad in chemistry. I went to Merrimack College and kind of loved my time at Merrimack. And then after undergrad, was really unsure of what I wanted to do with that, whether I wanted to go into more of a chemical engineering or synthetic chemistry. I took some classes on synthetic chemistry, medicinal chemistry, pharmacology, realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had a friend of mine who actually said, come join me at a company called Genetics Institute, which is now Wyeth, which got bought out by Pfizer. And I started my career as a bench scientist at that time and loved it.
And then from bench scientist, how'd you transition into operations, or what motivated you to do that? And was that at that first job, or was that at when you joined Novartis later on?
So I, from Genetics Institute, I went to Millennium, which again was a great experience. I was still at the bench, but really thinking of how do I stay close to the science, but not actually doing the science. Um, so at my time at Millennium, I was enrolled in an MBA program, and Millennium was fantastic. They let me do some
So you did follow
internships.
the business path to some degree with the MBA.
Yes, I did. Yes, yes, it did come around. Um, And I did some internships in finance and investor relations, wasn't still quite sure of what I wanted to do. And at that time, I got introduced to Scott Biller, who had just joined Novartis. He was forming a global chemistry organization. Um, and he needed some help in establishing this function. At the time, it was about 300 chemists across 7 sites. And I loved the kind of diversity of the role. I loved the chemistry team itself, and really wanted to work with Scott in this.
Was that did the bench being a bench scientist before, did that help with that new role?
It did in terms of credibility, and um, so having some credibility to start with. It also helped in really, I came from a position of science is hard. Um, Oftentimes you fail, and it was how do you support the researchers, and at this case the chemists, doing the chemistry so that they don't have to get bogged down in everything else, because it's hard enough.
And then, so you started for the Global Discovery Chemistry Group, and then how did your role and career evolve and take form at Novartis? I know you led a couple different jobs, like director of scientific operations, global head, I believe, of scientific operations. So how was that experience?
Yeah. So, what I loved about chemistry when I was in the chemistry organization, I was really going deep into supporting just the chemistry organization. And after, I think it was close to 7 years, I wanted some exposure to the rest of NIBR, to the rest of the research organization. And that kind of was the driver for my move into a function called scientific operations. And I was doing a similar role, just from a different perspective, and um, who I was supporting. And then after a couple of years in that role, I was asked to lead the function, which is incredible. It was 320 people across the globe, and the role ranged from um, being responsible for some of the animal facilities to some of the contracting and the MTAs and the CDAs to the lab support and the lab services. And during that time, we were involved in building some of the buildings in the Basel campus, Basel, Switzerland, and the Cambridge campus in Shanghai. And it was just an incredible experience.
Did you travel a bunch to each of the locations?
Yeah, yeah, especially at the beginning, because meeting people, really understanding there's such differences, not only from a culture perspective, but such differences on how each site works and operates. And it's really understanding those. It's building relationships with the people. So, really enjoyed that, the dynamics of leading a global organization.
And then so you then transitioned to Agios. So talk to us a little bit about that transition, because obviously Novartis is one of the largest pharma companies in the world, and then Agios is not small, but how large was Agios at the time that you joined? And I imagine it was a totally different experience, but probably had a bunch of pros and cons to it, and you probably had a lot of different roles to be in charge of there as the VP of Facilities Operations.
Yeah, yeah. So, my driver for leaving Novartis at NIBRA at the time was I really wanted to be involved in building something again. And When I joined Agios, they had just had approval of Tipsovo. They were growing, they were building out the European market. And they wanted somebody to come in and really help um, be involved in the workplace strategy, which is something that I had not done directly at Novartis, but wanted to be part of that building again. I also I mean, Agios is known for its incredible culture, really focused on the employees, and I wanted to experience that type of environment and be involved in that type of environment. So those were the two main drivers.
What made the culture so good at Agios? Just obviously knowing how important it is and competitive it is in the life science market in Cambridge to attract and retain talent. Just curious what the magic sauce was.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think there's probably one thing. I think there's probably a multitude of aspects to this. I think one piece is just the people. The people were amazing. They really had committed to as an organization of making sure that bringing in people that was really adding to the culture. and not leading with an ego first. And that really resonated with me and was true throughout the entire organization. And then it was this focus on employees. They really cared about employees. We cared about each other, and there was many times when employees were asked to provide feedback, or in my case, involved in some of the lab and some of the building design. And I thought that was amazing because employees had such a strong voice at Agios and really helped drive decisions at Agios.
For such a growing company and being involved in the building design and all the lab build outs, how was that to, did you have to plan for flexibility depending on where Agios, what science Agios grew into, or how was that designing labs, and was it taking on smaller spaces and then larger spaces to grow into it, or how was that experience?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of components to that. One was bringing in as much optionality as we possibly could in a really tight real estate market. And so that was one strategy. And then it was also in terms of like the lab design, trying to build as much flexibility without overdoing flexibility in the lab. And again, it's really bringing in the end users to say, this is where we are today, but we're also designing and building for where we want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. Let's talk about potential, what could potentially be on the table for the future.
How much of the science did you have to understand as you're building out the lab facilities, or is it just kind of coordinating with the end users and being the middleman of putting that to the actual design?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like it definitely was not doing the science, definitely not a expert. I think part of this was to a way to help pull out the key components and help think through what are the key drivers and the key requirements here, and talk about risk, talk about what were kind of some showstoppers. So it was just really being able to work with the end users and the scientists to be able to articulate that.
And so after Agios, what came next, and what led to the next transition?
Yeah, so I've recently joined, as you shared, a stealth company, and that was really driven from a time of. So we've went through incredible time at Agios. We had also COVID hit, and was a unique experience all on its own. Um, it was again kind of getting back to that desire to build and desire to kind of be involved in an earlier stage. I didn't think that I wanted to go this early. We're about 20 people right now. But over the past couple of months, it's been an incredible experience of, um, both like thinking through where do we want to be in the next 6 months to a year, but then really coming back to today and rolling up my sleeves and saying, what do we need to do today? And I love that mix of forward thinking strategy and then very practical, what do we need to do to be able to implement, to be able to support the science to get to that point.
Does your department, or kind of your department structure, is it different working at such an earlier stage company compared to Agios? Obviously, I assume Novartis as well, but how does that look from your end?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Because I'm from a G&A perspective, there's one other person and myself. So
Okay.
we're lean and mean, um, and
Imagine
it
that wasn't the case earlier on.
no, no, no. So it's gone from a team of 320 people to a team of two, which has been just as incredible. And we'll build the function to support the research. But I love the connections and getting back to how to support the basic research that's going on and how to really work in step with these incredible scientists.
Did you mentioned COVID? Not to harp on the subject that everyone's been talking about for the past 2 years. Did it, did that impact kind of how you think about lab, how life science companies operate, or at least in your experience? And do you think that was a shorter term adjustment, or do you think longer term implications as well?
I think there's some learnings that we can take from there. I think this is where the lab-based researchers are kind of the forefront of this. When I was at Agios, they still needed to come in to do their work. They couldn't do their work remotely. Not only that could they do not do it, they wanted to be in the lab. That's where their passion was. So my focus for that when I was at Agios was really, and this like stemmed from the top at Agios, was how to support them and making sure that they're safe and heard and supported, as they had no choice but they had to come on site. And I think this it's similar here, as um, we're lab based. Majority of the team members come in on a regular basis. I think what's different is there's a lot of flexibility now built into how we work. And so um, people can read their papers at home or do their analysis at home or somewhere else. And I think that's an amazing thing, because it's a way to balance, um, have a better balance.
We're running up on time, but just out of curiosity, did you always think that you were gonna, or did you always have that itch to build an earlier stage company, or did that just come organically as you were at earlier on in your career?
Yeah, I would say very typical to my entire career. It just kind of came organically. I actually thought that I would never want to be at this stage company, and I've learned never to say never, because it's been an incredible experience. And very, very grateful and fortunate to have this opportunity.
Was it through relationships that you had built that you developed relationships for the next role at the next company along the way?
Yes, yes. I mean, this is where it's through relationships, it's through incredible mentors. To also encourage you to say you can do this, and you need to give it a shot, which was incredible.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think
Thank you,
the
Dave.
conversation was great. So I appreciate your time, and for all the listeners, Stephanie Sousa, Stealth Company, coming to you soon.